Adrian, what happened to us after the wedding? My husband didn't even turn around. He lay on his side with his back toward me, exactly the way he had almost every night since we got married. Kim, not tonight. I stared at him. You've said that for almost 2 months. That finally made him sit up. His expression hardened. Are you counting? I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm asking why my husband won't even talk to me. Adrian shook his head, as though I were the unreasonable one. My body, my choice. You have no right. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. You're right. I don't have a right to your body. His shoulders relaxed, as if he thought he'd won. But I wasn't finished. Do I have the right to know whether you actually want this marriage? The room went completely silent. Adrian looked away. And that silence gave me the first real answer I'd received in nearly 60 days. Before our wedding, Adrian had been affectionate and attentive, but almost immediately after we said our vows, everything changed. The first night, he was exhausted. Then work was stressful. Then he had a headache. Then came the endless, not tonight. I respected every no. What I couldn't understand was everything else disappearing with it. He stopped reaching for my hand. Romantic evenings vanished. When I tried discussing the distance between us, he found some way to make the conversation about my behavior instead. Now, standing beside our bed, I asked the question I'd been terrified to ask. Do you regret marrying me? Adrian exhaled sharply. You're being dramatic. That isn't an answer. You need to stop keeping score, Kim. That sentence changed something in me. This wasn't about counting nights anymore. It was about honesty. The next morning, Adrian dressed for work as though nothing significant had happened. Before leaving, he kissed the air beside my cheek. See you tonight. I waited until his car disappeared. Then I opened the drawer where we kept important documents. I removed our marriage certificate, wedding paperwork, and the notes I'd quietly kept after our conversations repeatedly went nowhere. Instead of calling Adrian again, I called a family law attorney. Hours later, I sat across from her as she carefully explained my options, including dissolution, and whether the circumstances could support an annulment under the law. So, she said, closing the folder, what do you want to do? I looked down at my wedding ring. For almost 2 months, Adrian had controlled every conversation by refusing to have one. Not anymore. I won out. We began the filing process that afternoon. But there was something I couldn't understand yet. If Adrian wanted distance from his wife, badly enough to push me away every night, why would those court papers terrify him? Before our wedding, I never imagined I would become the woman secretly wondering whether her own husband regretted marrying her. Adrian had given me every reason to believe the opposite. Months before the ceremony, he would reach for my hand while we walked, pull me close while we cooked dinner, and talk about our future as though he could already see it. One day we're going to laugh about how stressed we were planning this wedding, he told me once. And after that, travel, a house, kids if we both want them, he smiled. Then we'll annoy each other until we're 80. That was the Adrian I married. On our wedding night, when he said he was exhausted, I didn't question him. We've been awake since 5, he said, loosening his tie. Can we just sleep? Of course. The second night, he blamed another long day. Then another excuse came. And another. At first, I told myself intimacy didn't determine whether a marriage was healthy. But within weeks, I noticed the physical distance wasn't happening alone. Adrian's phone started staying face down. Certain calls sent him outside. Then one evening, I noticed his passcode had changed. I tried not to assume the worst. Is something happening at work? I asked one night. His head snapped toward me. What does that mean? You seem distracted. So now you're monitoring me. Number Adrian, I was asking. Then stop interrogating me. I backed away. That became the pattern. I asked a reasonable question. Adrian reacted as if I'd accused him of something terrible, and I ended up wondering whether I had crossed a line. Until one afternoon, I went looking for a receipt in the desk we shared. I opened a folder containing paperwork from our wedding venue. A printed email slipped onto the floor. I almost put it back without reading it. Then I saw Adrian's name. The message was addressed to our venue coordinator. My eyes stopped on one sentence. Adrian had asked what financial penalties would apply if our wedding were canceled. I checked the date, then checked it again. 3 days before our ceremony. 3 days before Adrian stood in front of our families and promised to spend his life with me. He had been calculating what it would cost to walk away. Yet he'd never mentioned having doubts. My hands went cold as I stared at the page. Suddenly, those first 60 nights looked different. Maybe Adrian's withdrawal hadn't started after our wedding at all. Maybe whatever had changed him had happened before it. I heard a car outside and quickly looked toward the window. Adrian could be home any minute. I pulled out my phone. I photographed the email. Then I sent the image to myself. A few days later, Adrian raised his glass at a family dinner and said something that almost made me choke. Married life is perfect. Everyone around the table smiled. I turned slowly toward him. Perfect. His mother laughed. Look at you two. Newlyweds are supposed to be inseparable. Adrian smiled, as though we'd rehearsed the moment. Then he slipped his arm around my shoulders. I went completely still. It was the first time in weeks he'd touched me affectionately without being prompted, and he was doing it because people were watching. You're both glowing, someone said. I looked at Adrian's hand, resting on my shoulder. At home, he could barely tolerate questions about our marriage. Here, he wanted everyone to believe we couldn't be happier. Then someone asked, "Where are the honeymoon pictures? We haven't seen anything." Adrian's arm immediately dropped. "We'll show you another time," he said quickly. "Actually, has everyone heard about Daniel's promotion?" The conversation moved on. But something inside me didn't. I waited until we were driving home. "Why did you do that?" Adrian kept his eyes on the road. "Do what?" "Tell everyone our marriage is perfect." He sighed. "Kim, seriously. You won't discuss our marriage with me, but you'll perform one for everyone else. Our private life isn't anybody's business." I agree. So why manufacture a fake version of it? His jaw tightened. "You were going to embarrass me tonight, weren't you?" I stared at him. "That's what you're worried about." He didn't answer. Later that night, Adrian left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he went upstairs. I poured myself a glass of water and walked past it. Then the screen illuminated. I wasn't searching his phone. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. A message preview appeared clearly across the locked screen. Vanessa. I knew that name. Vanessa was Adrian's former fiancée. The woman he'd once told me was completely in his past. Her message contained only 4 words. "Have you decided yet?" My stomach tightened. Decided what? Footsteps sounded behind me. Adrian entered the kitchen, saw the illuminated screen, and crossed the room immediately. He grabbed the phone. Then he looked at me. For the first time since our wedding, his calm expression slipped. "Why is Vanessa asking if you've decided?" I asked. His fingers closed around the phone. "She contacted me about something personal." "What?" "It's unrelated to us." "Then tell me." I don't have to explain every conversation I have. I stared at the man who had spent weeks insisting there was nothing wrong. The hidden phone. The changed passcode. The cancellation inquiry 3 days before our wedding. And now, his former fiancée was waiting for a decision. "Adrian," I said quietly, "decided what?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Whatever you think you saw, don't turn it into something it isn't." I stopped asking Adrian for explanations. The next person I spoke to was my attorney. I placed the photograph of the cancellation inquiry in front of her and explained the message I'd seen from Vanessa. "Have you decided yet?" I repeated. My attorney studied the timeline. Then she looked at me. "Kim, you don't need to prove an affair simply to decide you won't remain in a marriage without trust, communication, or mutual commitment." That mattered. For weeks, Adrian had made me feel as though I needed his permission to believe something was wrong. I didn't. I told my attorney to proceed. Soon afterward, Adrian was formally served. His reaction wasn't sadness. It was panic. He came through our front door that evening, holding the papers. "Kim." I stepped out of the kitchen. He slapped the documents onto the counter. "Who knows about this?" I stared at him. Not "can we fix this?" Not "I'm sorry." Not even "please don't leave." His first concern was who knew. My attorney knows. Who else? Why does that matter? Because this is our marriage. We can handle this privately. Then let's talk honestly. His expression tightened. Withdraw this first. No. We can work something out. Counseling. He hesitated. Complete honesty about Vanessa. Silence. There it was again. The same silence he'd given me when I asked whether he wanted our marriage. "Withdraw the filing," he repeated, "and then we'll talk." I picked up the papers and handed them back. "No, you talk first." He wouldn't. So the legal process continued. And suddenly, the husband who had spent 2 months avoiding conversations couldn't stop trying to have one. My phone rang while I was sitting in my attorney's office. "Adrian." I declined it. Seconds later, it rang again. Then again. I turned the phone face down. My attorney slid another document toward me. "There's something important about that venue inquiry." I looked up. "The date." She nodded. We compared it with the timeline we'd established from the information already uncovered. Adrian had asked about canceling our wedding the day after Vanessa first contacted him. I stared at those dates. Everything snapped into place. Vanessa returned. The next day, Adrian investigated what it would cost to cancel our wedding. Then he married me anyway. And immediately afterward, the affection disappeared. The intimacy disappeared. The honesty disappeared. My phone kept vibrating against the desk. I finally reached over and silenced it. For 2 months, I'd tried to get Adrian to give me one honest conversation. Now that I was leaving, he apparently couldn't tolerate my silence. A few minutes later, I turned my phone over. The screen illuminated again. I froze when I saw the notification. "Adrian, 94 MISSCD calls." I finally agreed to speak with Adrian, but this time the conversation wasn't about saving our marriage. It was about ending it honestly. I placed the venue cancellation inquiry in front of him, followed by the timeline I'd pieced together. Adrian stared at the papers without touching them. I didn't raise my voice. "Did Vanessa contact you before our wedding?" His eyes remained fixed on the table. "Adrian." He exhaled slowly. "Yes." One word answered nearly every question I'd been asking for 2 months. "When?" "A few days before the wedding." "And what did she want?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "She said ending our relationship had been a mistake. She wanted another chance." I looked at the cancellation inquiry. "So the next day, you contacted our venue." I panicked. "You were thinking about canceling our wedding." I didn't know what I wanted. "But you married me." Adrian finally looked at me. Everyone had already traveled. We'd paid deposits. Our families were expecting this huge wedding. Do you understand what would have happened if I'd canceled 3 days beforehand? I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You were worried about losing money." It wasn't just money, Kim. Everyone would have known. It would have been humiliating. I leaned back. So humiliating me afterward was easier. He said nothing. I pointed toward the timeline. Did you keep talking to Vanessa after we got married? Another pause. Yes. There was the rest of it. Adrian admitted that he had continued communicating privately with her because he still didn't know whether he wanted to rebuild that relationship. And that's why you wouldn't touch me. I was confused. For 2 months, I didn't want to do something, and my head wasn't completely in the marriage. I stared at him. You realize what you're saying, don't you? He looked away. You made me your wife while deciding whether you wanted someone else. Kim, I never meant to hurt you. You expected me to wait. I needed time. You already had time before you married me. He had no answer. And suddenly, his words from that night came back to me. My body, my choice. You have no right. The principle had never been the problem. Adrian absolutely had the right to refuse intimacy. But he'd used that truth as a shield against a completely different question, whether he'd entered our marriage honestly. You were right about one thing, I said. His eyes lifted. You always had the right to say no. I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside the papers. And I have the right to leave a marriage built on deception. Kim, wait. No. For once, that single word belonged to me. I continued with the court process. Adrian repeatedly tried to persuade me to handle everything through a private arrangement, but I refused. The marriage was ended through the legally appropriate dissolution process, and the financial matters were handled formally. Eventually, our families learned enough to understand why our marriage had collapsed. The image Adrian had protected so carefully disappeared. He could no longer tell people married life was perfect while keeping the truth hidden behind our front door. And Vanessa didn't become the happy ending he'd apparently imagined might still be waiting for him. Once secrecy was replaced by consequences, their renewed connection fell apart too. The strangest part was the reversal. For nearly 60 nights, I had been the one asking, "Can we talk? Is something wrong? Do you regret marrying me?" Adrian controlled every conversation by deciding when it ended. Then I stopped asking. And suddenly, he was the one calling. Those *94 missed calls became the clearest reminder of how completely the balance had shifted. Months later, I was living independently. The silence in my home no longer frightened me because it wasn't being used to punish or confuse me. I didn't have to study someone's expression before asking a reasonable question. I didn't have to wonder whether wanting honesty made me demanding. And I finally understood something I'd missed while desperately trying to save my marriage. Respecting another person's boundaries doesn't require abandoning your own. Our wedding certificate had made Adrian my husband. It couldn't make him honest, and it couldn't require me to remain his wife. Adrian had every right to decide what happened to his body, but I finally understood that I had exactly the same right to decide what happened to the rest of my life.